is Linda speaking. Could you hold on for just a moment? I'm wondering, I would like to just see who all is on. I only see 6. So maybe it's something that in my Zoom, I'm not able to see everyone.
That's right. That's right, Linda. This is David. It looks like we have 6 right now, and we'll go on basically right now because it's 4 o'clock. So. Okay, great. Looks like we are now on. Just the camera there. Hello, everyone. It is 4 o'clock. Now is the time set for the board meeting of the Arizona State Schools for the Deaf and the Blind. We have a special meeting. Thank you for everyone to take the time to come meet with us today, and thank you for or to the media production staff to make this happen on Zoom once again. We'll start with agenda item 1.01, call to order and roll call. Suke, could you take the roll?
Sure. Brittany Buchanan.
I'm present.
Linda Bove.
Present.
Lynn Davison.
Present.
Mike Gordon.
I'm present.
Dean Howard. PV Jantz. Myself, Suke Kneifel, is present. David Nigro.
Present.
And Aaron Wonders.
Present.
David, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Sorry about that. We can move on to 1.01, discussion and action item of the approval of the proposed LEA bills. This is a matter that we talked about at our last regular board meeting. The proposed changes weren't exactly nailed down yet, so that's why we call this meeting to go over the proposal. And just to set the context a bit, as you know, there were some statutory changes earlier in the year that caused some changes in the way that the agency operates in some regard, and a few issues kind of arose because of that, relating to several issues. Transportation a key one, but there are others. So what we have here is a proposal from the agency to bring to the legislature to ask that they implement these changes to resolve some of those issues. And with that, I will turn it over to Maria Murphy to explain these documents.
Good afternoon, Mr. Nigro, members of the board. This is Maria Murphy, Director of Policy and Government Relations. You have before you copies of the proposed changes of the draft bill that we would like to present to the Arizona State Legislature in January. There are 2 components to this draft legislation. The first is for section 1306 of Title 15. And essentially what this proposes to do is to adopt permanently some of the things that were put into what's called session law with the last session. So what it does is it makes it extremely clear that ASDB is considered a district of responsibility, as well as being a local educational agency. It clarifies that we are responsible for FAPE, a free and appropriate public education. Now, what this is meant to do is it is meant to apply to the Tucson and the Phoenix campuses, as well as the programs that are located at FBC, as well as Desert Voices, because they are considered ASDB students. They're considered enrolled in ASDB. It also makes very clear that if ASDB is no longer considered the least restrictive environment, the school that the student previously attended would need to re-enroll that particular student. So it would also place on ASDB the onus that our IEP team would need to invite that charter or school district to any meetings that would determine a placement status and would determine potentially re-enrolling that student back in the public school. Are there any questions in regards to 1306?
Yes. D. Arizona State Schools for the Deaf and Blind shall hold a placement meeting for pupils enrolled in a campus-based model at least annually to review the pupils' placement status and shall invite a representative of the pupils' home. Isn't that our annual IEP meeting that we are required by law to have through IDEA?
Yes, and it is contemplated that we would be able to hold these meetings at the same time. So we would not necessarily have to hold two different meetings. We would just be holding the one meeting, and that would satisfy for both.
So this is a separate meeting from the IEP, isn't to review placement? That's what you do at the IEP meeting every year.
Yeah, it's meant to be one meeting.
Okay.
So the IEP meeting. And
would it be more clear if we also addressed the IEP meeting, since that is by IDEA required annually, at least annually? You can have one anytime, but it's required at least annually. And that is a placement in least restrictive environment determination.
okay.
Just to make it clear, so it doesn't sound like it's. The other question I had was in new H, where it says a complete record of every person admitted shall be kept from the date of his admission to the date of his discharge or death. I think this is old language from when we were considered, the institution. What is the discharge? Is that graduation? Or death? Just asking.
Okay, so my apologies, Lynn, because I do not have it open right now. Let me go and open it so I
Okay.
can look at what you're saying. My apologies. Okay, I'm sorry. Now I am at H. Could you just please repeat your question, Lynn?
Okay, where it says a complete record of every person admitted shall be kept from the date of his admission to the date of his discharge or death. What is his discharge?
Okay,
I
so
understand death, but
yes. So I would presume, and that's a dangerous thing to do when you're dealing with statute, but that would mean either the child has graduated or the child has potentially been released back to the local school district or the charter.
could we make that more clear?
Yeah.
This is Linda. I agree. I would like to clarify that.
This is Sue K. I would also like further clarity as if those are the only two options. I would think if they transferred or moved, any of those would be considered discharge as well. So we might want to get a little bit further clarity on what that definition is.
Right.
Okay.
It's not educational lingo to discharge. And
A
just
little
above,
odd, a little bit of an odd choice.
and just above that in G, where at the end of that paragraph, they shall locate or establish a program to meet the child's needs in consultation with the Department of Education and any other appropriate agencies. Is this to look at other agencies that are accepted by the ADA for placement. There's a list of approved day schools. What are we looking for at the Department of Education?
So I believe that this would be just other different day programs or other potential schools. So we're talking about the home school district here and the superintendent of ASDB. So that would be to try and find another appropriate placement.
Making sure we're clear. Now that I've got the floor, I'll keep going. In I is if there's any question regarding the propriety of placement or admission of any person received in the schools, the governing board of the homeschool district or the board of the schools shall make an investigation into such action as it deems taken. Isn't placement part of the what the IEP team does? You would reconvene the IEP team to determine the placement before it goes to a board. Erin, can you help with that?
Excuse me, this is PV. I just wanted to note for the record that I am present. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess the way that I read it is that if there's a question outside of the IEP process, so perhaps a parent raises a concern that it's a directive on looking into whether or not the placement was proper, but that would be convened through the IEP meeting is my understanding.
Right. I think we need more clarity on that one because to make, it sounds like you just go to the boards and that I've not heard of that. I don't know if you have, Erin, but
Yeah,
I think that needs to be made more clear.
So Lynn, what you would like to see then essentially is something clarifying that if there is any question regarding the propriety of the placement at the IEP team meeting, then the governing boards would get involved. Is that what you're trying to say?
Well, I know the IEP team would be the first. I've
Right.
not heard of it going as far as a board. Erin, can you?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the escalation process is. I thought that if there is concern, it would go through like dispute resolution if there's
Right.
some significant disagreement with the type of placement. But again, I think at least from my perspective, looking at the language, I think the directive in this was trying to align some of the changes in last year's legislation with the statute, and not like that piece wasn't one of the ones that was touched. So I think that is potentially a question in terms of the drafting of legislation as to what extent is there additional changes outside of that pathway.
This is Linda. I have a question. Thank you. This is Linda Bove. And thank you, Lynn, for helping to clarify those sections. That was helpful for me as well. My question for Maria is, has the school's attorney general had an opportunity to review this proposed language? 1306, yeah?
Yes.
Okay. And I was just curious because the point was brought up. Lynn and Erin both mentioned some clarification that is beneficial. And I was wondering if the AG had any feedback on any of the language to make sure that we're not overlooking any loopholes or something, or overlooking anything that may be misinterpreted down the road due to a lack of clarity. So it's nice to have some other people in authority on the same page. So I do appreciate that, having the extra set of eyes on it. Thank you, Maria.
You're welcome.
And if I may, I also just wanted to, on behalf of the agency, thank Maria for her communication and the development of this language. We had the opportunity to review it and think that it meets the needs in terms of setting the pathway forward.
This is Mike. I have a question, please, by Chan. This is not necessarily around the wording of the statute, but I'm curious when it comes to our contractors with Foundation of Blind Children and Desert Voices, how many students are being served in those two partnerships? And are those annual contracts that are awarded, or I mean, how are those negotiated and or procured? And just curious, because if they're going to be included in this, it's a little different than our two brick and mortar schools per se.
Certainly. And Annette, please feel free to jump in if I'm giving the wrong information, but it is my understanding that currently Desert Voices has approximately 3 children and FBC has somewhere in the realm of about 80 children.
Yeah, and Mike, this is David. We did an RFP process for a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, and a contract was awarded to Desert Voices for 5 years. We just, this year, as I believe was reported in the last board meeting, finalized a contract with FBC, and that is it's a 1-year contract, but it's renewable up to, I believe, 4 or 5 times if I reviewed the last copy. That's where we are there. So, again, they get renegotiated and or renewed, in the FBC case every year. And at the end of the 5 years from Desert Voices, we're already 2 years in. Maybe we'll do another RFP process or go through the state procurement process to renegotiate. Okay. And is the FBC, is that a K-12 or K-6 or what's the age group frame there? The FBC has, FBC as an institution has preschool through 4th grade. We're really only talking about children that, as I understand it, we're talking about, above age 3. So it would be, not the early intervention program where we send itinerants to the homes, but it would be children that are over age 3. Like a preschool, okay. Yeah.
3 to 5, correct. It's
3
3
to
to
5, yes, and that's saying that 3 to 5, right? So at 5, you'd enter kindergarten. Okay. And nothing like that's being offered in Tucson?
Not at this time.
There's not currently a preschool for the blind in Tucson. Okay, thank you. By either FEC or the agency. Thank you. Answer my question.
Are those all the questions for 1306? I will go ahead then.
Annette had her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Annette, I didn't see you.
This is Annette speaking. My question is for the board. Lynn recently asked for several revisions. So what does that mean at this point? Do we need to rewrite that and come back to the board for approval at a different time? Or do we make a note in the vote itself of the proposed revisions that the board wants this afternoon? Or how do we move forward?
And then I think those revisions are minor, and I think that we can approve them, with some leeway, right? I don't think we need to have word for word, fidelity with what we pass. I mean, I think if we have the direction that, because, unless anyone on the board, if we have a motion that includes the proposed changes as modified by Lynn's comments, then I think that would be okay. Is there any disagreement on that?
This is Annette. Okay, sounds good.
All right. At least procedurally. Okay, so Ms. Murphy, if you can move on to the next document.
Certainly. So the next document is proposing to revise Title 15 1204, which is also called the Special Education Voucher Fund for State Institutional Placement. And what we are proposing to do here is to revise the Group A and Group B weight fundings, specifically for capital outlay as well as for transportation. Currently, capital outlay is funded at $100 per student, and what we are doing is proposing to change that to a minimum of $450 for preschoolers with disabilities to a maximum of $590 per student, and that would be for grades 9 through 12. And what we did here is because we were able to do the research and find that the state institutional voucher does not include any kind of additional assistance, we believe that it was very reasonable for us to request this funding in a manner that would be consistent with what public school districts are receiving. So what we did was we used the formula that would calculate the additional aid for school districts. It's also known as the DAA funding. And this is what ASDB would be receiving if it was being treated similarly to a school district. It also revises the Group A and the Group B funding from a flat $50 per student to a rate of $5.23 per route mile. And our transportation department and Director Duff took a look at it and made these calculations because in looking at TSL funding, also called the transportation support level funding, that money was actually insufficient for what ASDB needed. TSL funding is what school districts would be receiving. And because of the unique nature of what it is that ASDB does, we would need additional funding, which is why transportation calculated that $5.23 per route mile would essentially be able to make us whole. So that is in regards to transportation. We then would be asking for additional funding of $69.68 for our high school students for textbooks, related subject matter materials. And again, this is consistent with what school districts receive for their high school students. We may also, if possible, ask for certain additional funding for textbooks because of the additional costs of assistive technology and Braille books, particularly for our blind and low vision students. And then the final thing that we did is that we were stipulating that the amounts for capital outlay and transportation would be increased subject to the growth rate. We're hopeful that will pass because at this time, public school districts do not have DAA, the district additional assistance, increased subject really to the growth rate. So this is everything that we are asking for in 1204, the state institutional voucher.
This is Linda. I have a question. Speaking of the $5 and change per mile, that's per student. And so we have some students that live farther away. So how are we calculating for distance? Can you explain a little bit more about how that works?
Certainly. This is not being calculated per student. It is being calculated per route mile. So what we would do is literally calculate the number of miles that the bus is actually traveling, and it would be $5.23 per route mile for that student.
Okay. So we've got a lot of students that may live farther and a few that live closer. So I'm wondering about the difference in calculation. So it wouldn't really matter the number of students on a specific route. I'm just wondering how exactly that plays out.
So what we would be doing is we would be measuring the number of miles that the school bus is traveling, the route mile.
Okay, Okay.
I have one quick question this time. Part D, where it says the director of the Division of Special Education shall develop requirements for the approval of vouchers. Who is that director of the Division of Special Education?
Are you asking for a name?
No, I did. Where is this ADE? Is it,
Yes, it's my
Yeah,
understanding.
yeah, who is that?
okay.
Yes. So it's my understanding that that's ADE.
Correct, Erin?
Let me read this. Hang on. Let me go
Okay.
back and read it.
Yeah.
That's my
I just-
understanding as well, is that the department sets requirements around the process for vouchers to be approved, subject to the statutory provisions.
Okay, I just didn't know who this mysterious director of.
And my apologies, because I want to make sure I'm reading all the subsections to make sure that I have the appropriate context for you, Lynn.
That's my only question this time, so.
Okay, that's a good question.
Are there any questions? Oh, PV?
Yes, this is PV Jans. I do have a few questions. I was waiting to see if the others answered questions on my behalf, but now I will throw them at you. So first question, related to transportation cost, is that a fixed rate? I'm just wondering, once that legislation passes, if it is approved, if that rate will change. If it does not change, how will that impact our transportation budget 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, even 20 years down the road, as we account for changes in the economy?
That's a great question. And right now, it is fixed at $5.23 per mile. But what we have done is we did request that the transportation could be increased by the growth rate prescribed by law, if that is appropriated. So hopefully with the growth rate, we would be seeing that number incrementally growing year by year.
Okay. And the growth rate meaning number of students, or growth rate meaning inflation or cost of gas, or what are we talking about?
Inflation.
Okay, perfect. I am happy to see that. And it would be great to make sure that that number stays in alignment with other districts. Secondly, that cost would be an estimate, and then would also be considering if ASDB needs more special buses with special equipment. Would that be built into that budget? Because that, as you know, that type of specialized equipment can be pretty costly compared to a regular school bus.
It is my understanding, PV, that the transportation department took into account all of their costs, including labor as well as materials, to determine that $5.23 per route mile rate. So that is taken as a whole when we made that calculation.
Okay, wonderful. Third question. I wanted to go back to D. Lynn had mentioned section D. And I haven't seen it in the document, but I may have overlooked it. So I'm hoping for some clarification related to the statute, where exactly parents go to register their students if they want their child to go to ASDB.
Okay, so that is actually covered in the other document, which we have previously discussed, which is 1306. That outlines the admissions process. And it specifically states that, that the IEP team of the home school district and ASDB together, and the parents are represented in that IEP team meeting, determine where the appropriate placement is for that student. but that is in 1306, not in 1204.
Okay, okay. If you don't mind, then I would like to revisit 1306 really briefly, just to get some clarification.
Okay.
So does that mean that every year the IEP team has to determine whether a child can go to ASDB campus before they're able to register for the following school year?
So it is my understanding that the IEP team is supposed to convene every year. And one of the questions that the IEP team discusses every year is ASDB still the appropriate placement? Are we still the least restrictive environment for the student? So that's something that should be happening every year anyway. Annette, please correct me if I'm wrong.
You're correct. This is Annette. That's correct. And this is PV. Allow me to rephrase the question. What exactly will be the registration process annually after the IEP team has agreed on placement?
After the IEP team agrees on placement, then the student would be registered directly with ASDB. We would not have to go through the process of having the local home school district registering the child, which is what was happening previously. The child would be registering with ASDB.
Okay. Can you show me or point out to me where in the language that is? So I can just kind of get a better handle on the meaning behind that.
Sure. Let me go back. It never opens when you want it to reopen. Sorry, I'm having difficulty opening it up. Hold on one moment. Let me try this again. There we go. Okay.
Totally get it.
Got it. I'm so
All
sorry.
of the Amazon internet issues. It's
Yeah, I beg your pardon. Okay, and I'm toggling back and forth between two different documents. So we are talking about 1342 admissions, and what we're talking about is that evaluation and consideration of placement shall be made under the direction of the chief administrative official of the home school district. And it also notes that if a parent directly refers to ASDB, that we have an obligation to refer back to the home school district and arrange for the establishment of the IEP placement team to do an IEP team meeting. And then B specifically states that the IEP team would determine what is the appropriate educational placement for the child. And under that, it talks about everybody who is specifically supposed to be in the IEP team meeting, making sure that there's somebody from the homeschool district, the parents, a certified teacher, and somebody from ASDB, as well as, if appropriate, the child, him or herself.
Okay. I'm still not seeing where that list is in terms of who's responsible for registration of the student after placement is determined.
I don't believe that registration would specifically be in the statute. Let me go to.
Oh, okay. Then how is registration determined by other school districts?
Well, typically it's a process or a procedure. So that's how it's been done in the past. Annette, can you help me with this one?
Sure. This is Annette. Our statute and admissions it's admissions, not registration. Registration is a technical process for, going into paperwork and all of that, but the admissions is what's in the statute. When the IEP team has determined placement, that if ASDB will be the place and we agree to take that student, it has to be consensus and it has to be agreed on by the IEP team during that meeting. Then that student is admitted to ASDB. They have been accepted into ASDB by the IEP team. And then the registration process takes over from there, and that is not in statute.
Yeah. I just went back to double check, and registration is not anywhere in the statute, but admission is.
Mrs. Peavy, thank you, Superintendent. I appreciate your clarification. Related to admissions, what will set the procedure or clarify the understanding that once the IEP team has reached consensus and ASDB has accepted that student, then what?
Then the student would be considered to be admitted, and we would start the registration process, and then make sure that we were holding the at least annual IEP team meetings to determine placement, to determine progress towards the IEP goals, etc.
So Ms. Murphy, in your opinion regarding that language, is this language sufficient so that if the legislator approves it, then we will not face that registration or admissions issue again in the future as we have in the past?
So PV, it is not just necessarily my opinion, but it has been run by our Assistant Attorney General. It has been run by the Department of Education and our subject matter experts internally as well. And we are all in agreement that this should be sufficient to prevent those problems in the future.
Wonderful. That is what I wanted to know and make sure that we are crystal clear on that point. So thank you for your time and going into more detail about that for me.
Of course. I wouldn't ever want to just rely on my opinion. My opinion is just one person's opinion. So I want to make sure that we have the subject matter experts looking at it as well.
Perfect. This is PV again. The funny thing for me is that you are very well versed in your job, and I have always appreciated the information that you've shared with us and what you've presented to the board.
Well, you all have asked.
What you've been explaining and what you've provided is very satisfactory, and I'm happy to know that hopefully the community will be able to see that a lot of work and a lot of effort has been put into this to develop it in a manner that addresses all of those issues, those admissions and registration issues that we have faced and talked about for a very long time now. Hopefully that will, hopefully the community will be satisfied with that explanation as well. So again, thank you for that due diligence and for that extensive research. I appreciate it.
Thank you for the very kind words. And this was absolutely a team effort, and it was a cross-agency effort with the Attorney General's office, with ADE, as well as our own subject matter experts within ASDB. So, and actually, I think that the input that the board has offered me today is very, very helpful as well. So thanks to all of you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Are there any other questions about transportation? And I think we should note that, even though, this statute would provide, an additional revenue stream for the agency has the new responsibilities of transportation that we were not bearing before, that was borne by the school district. So, these students were all transported by their school districts to the agency schools. those school districts were receiving funds, as Ms. Murphy has noted, through the DAA support, through the TSL level support. Those school districts will, then lose those funds that are associated with transportation for those students. And now the statute allows the agency to access funds to transport those students. Now, because of the route miles and some other factors, it may not be dollar for dollar, but the end result is the school districts won't have responsibility and won't receive funding for those students for transportation, and that's going to be moved over for the agency, to provide that service. PV?
Yes, this is PV. Thank you, President Nigro. You brought up an excellent point, and that I wanted to go back, if you don't mind, to the transportation route mileage issue. And I'm wondering if that includes potential transportation for assistance on the routes, for nurses, for additional staff that may need to be transported to care for our students.
That is an excellent question. And yes, labor was contemplated in this. And we specifically went back and looked to see if the additional students in terms of the Foundation for Blind Children, as well as Desert Voices, was going to change our calculation of the $5.23 per mile, and transportation determined that it does not change it. But yes, it absolutely does include our costs for labor as well. And that's not just drivers, that's chaperones, nurses, etc.
Okay. Is there anything built in or a cushion for, let's say, if 1 year ASDB happens to have multiple admissions of students who need transportation, additional assistance like nursing or something like that? Is there a cushion in the budget to allow us to cover that cost, or another way to get another way to cover that cost?
I just want to make sure that I understand the question that you're asking. Are you asking whether the $5.23 per route mile builds in a cushion?
I'm asking if, for example, 1 year we have an increased admissions and we happen to have a lot of extra students that need transportation support services like nursing or additional staff on those routes to support those students. Is that cost, that potential increase of cost, covered based on the number of students enrolled, or how is the agency planning to cover that potential cost? And is there some kind of built-in consideration for a potential increase in that cost that aligns with that specialized services that some students may need?
Annette, do you want to take this?
Yes, this is Annette. Okay, this is Annette. That is a budgetary question. And it's not really something that we can put into the proposed legislation. We are asking for $5 and change per route mile. And that was based on a calculation that we believe will cover our costs. If we're talking about a year that's a little bit off from our norm, that $5 and change cannot change to accommodate any increased expenditure in a given year. But we have done our best calculation with potential costs based on the factors that we know of. But no, that cost does not allow for flexibility from year to year based on any changes we may have in enrollment. That's why we're asking for that inflation consideration. So hopefully we will continue to get that inflated rate as necessary. The question that you're asking is more related to our budget, which we wouldn't be addressing in legislation. That will be a separate conversation. PV said, okay, thank you.
Right, and this is David. I was just to follow on with that. Because it's per route mile, the amount of funding will scale with the number of students that we need to transport, but it's not one-to-one. It really depends on the route mile. So if the students are if they all live close to each other and they're close to the school, then, we're not going to see much more increase in route miles. But if they're further away and we can't fit them on the same routes, then that's going to be a little bit larger. So it really depends on transportation. But, the key to this is that this scheme of transportation support mirrors what school districts get. So school districts face this problem as well, or this issue, this logistical issue. We'll face it as well, but we are with these changes, should they go through, the idea is that we would have a funding stream that was comparable to the school districts, where we don't have that right now. PV, if you're asking about the nursing services, you're right that as an LEA, there are additional nursing costs with some students who need it that are shifted to the agency from the school districts in a non-trivial amount for this year, and that amount will change as the student enrollment changes and as students' needs change. But as Superintendent Reichman mentioned, that's really an appropriation issue that we'll deal with on that side. That doesn't really require a statutory change. Like the transportation, there just isn't a statutory scheme to provide transportation support to ASDB because the school districts were formally doing this. Are there any other comments about either of these items? No. So I think at this point we'd probably want to entertain a motion to support these changes at the legislature, subject to Lynn's comments. Lynn, I don't know if you want to summarize those 2 points so that we have a more clear record of what they are. I mean, we have a record. We have the record of this meeting. But if you'd like to say if you could summarize them in like 3 sentences and say that we support these changes with modifications to address those issues.
There. Maria, maybe you can, I saw you writing, so.
So I actually, and I apologize for interrupting you, Lynn, I actually counted 4 items that you had brought up. And the first was to make sure that we were adding additional clarity to the language that the IEP meeting and the placement meeting could be one meeting and not 2 separate meetings. Then in part H, that we need to make discharge clearer. That discharge would be either graduation, aging out, or potential removal from the school. And that, I beg your pardon. And then the third one would be what happens if there is a disagreement between the different members of the IEP team about where the appropriate placement is. So what happens if it is escalated? So does it go to dispute resolution, or would it go to the ASDB board or the homeschool district board? So did I get everything, Lynn?
Yes, what she said.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. So at this point, would anyone like to move that we adopt support, or that we support presenting the proposed legislation to the legislature, subject to the comments that Maria has summarized?
David, this is Lynn. I'll move that we support this legislation with the minor changes and clarifications. Basically, it's not really a change, it's more of a clarification to this legislation.
Okay.
This is PV, I
PV?
second.
Second. Okay. All in favor, you can say aye or turn on your video and give a thumbs up.
Say aye.
Aye.
Okay,
Aye.
and I'm recording yeses for everyone except for Aaron. And then the next I'll take any nays.
And I'll be abstaining.
And then any abstentions, right? So, okay, so then Aaron abstains. Great, excellent, thank you. We can move on to our next item. And the next item on the agenda, 1.03, discussion of possible action item, change of work study session dates. I know, for this one, there's some thinking that we might want to change the date of the work study that we have set for April, based on our itinerant services. Does anyone have any comments on that?
My comment would be that I'd like to see it moved up to January or February sometime sooner, since we've heard, some of the issues that are going on. We heard at the last board meeting, and I think it would behoove us to address it sooner than later.
This is Linda. I agree with you, Lynn. I would like to learn more about how the itinerant programs are being run. I haven't heard much, I think in maybe a year or so, about the itinerant services and what is happening there, what some of the concerns are. So I would like to learn more about that so that we can provide appropriate support to our programs. And if there are concerns, if there's something that the board can do to make it right. So I would like to know what is going on in our itinerant programs. And I agree, I would like to have that discussion earlier. Mrs. Peavy. I would like to ask for clarification. Can you please share the current dates on our calendar and the topic for each upcoming work study session? I'm not seeing that on the agenda.
I think we have, well, those dates aren't on this agenda. Those dates were set at the last board meeting. And I don't know that I have a list of that right here handy. Letitia, do you happen to have that list? I know it's in April, but I don't know the particular date.
This is Annette. We have April 14th
Okay.
for the itinerant services discussion. That is a work study session. And the earlier one is in February. That one is regarding our budget and finances. Checking my calendar here.
So, I mean, Superintendent Reichman, this is David. I mean, would it be possible if we just swap the topics from April to February? Does that work? So our dates we've already cleared.
Yes.
And we get that up earlier. I know, that we want to take a look at that sooner rather than later. And is February, that right
That's
time?
fine with us. Yes, February 10th, I believe. February 10th.
All right. My video might be frozen.
Yeah.
Can you still hear
We can
me?
swap those. Your
Okay.
video is frozen, David, but we can still hear you.
Okay, great. Excellent. So any comments about that, about change, the proposal to change those topics? So we keep the same dates, but we change topics. Okay. All right. Well, I can move that we change the topics for the work study sessions in April and February. So we do finance in April and we do itinerant services in February. The date's already scheduled. There any seconds?
This is Lynn, I second.
Okay. All in favor? We can. Well, apparently my video doesn't work, but I'm saying aye. Any ayes? Looks like we have one. My video will start. Any no's? There I am. No nays and any abstentions? Great. Okay, so we'll change the topics of those. And then the next item is adjournment. Lynn, would you like to move to adjourn? Yes,
Lynn, you're muted.
she's muted, but yeah.
He can read my, I move that we adjourn this meeting.
Any seconds? Brittany has seconded.
Jumped in.
All in favor? Aye. And any opposed? No. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for this special meeting. I'm glad we were able to get that accomplished. And we
Thank
will
you so much.
come
Yeah.
back next year. So happy holidays, everyone.
Thank you, Maria.
Thanks.